Right now, it's all about mixing and matching. But in 3 weeks' time, it is not going to be mixing and matching no more. It will be ready for the Hall of Fame announcement for the MLB 2023 Hall of Fame ballot on January 22nd, I believe. Who we will find out who will join Fred McGriff as the next member of baseball's hallowed halls, joining Fred McGriff in Cooperstown. Right now, based on the Hall of Fame tracker, Scott Rowland is destined for Cooperstown with Todd Helton right behind him, and as of a couple of days ago, it does seem like that Scott Rowland and Todd Helton, alongside Billy Wagner, may be in. It's only a matter of academia at this point if those two will join Fred McGriff in baseball's hallowed halls come January, come the end of January. I have my way too early predictions for the Hall of Fame, and I went with a big ballot. I went with 10, and the outlier being 11. The 10 people that I would vote in are Todd Helton, Gary Sheffield, Jeff Kent, Billy Wagner, Andrew Jones, Torrey Hunter, Carlos Beltran, K-Rod, Scott Rowland, and honestly, I'm going to switch out who I had, as I doubt Houston Street will stay on the ballot, and I will replace him, giving Bobby Abreu another vote. But I was either going to give. I was either going to give. See, in my opinion, I think Scott Rowland is a borderline Hall of Famer. In my opinion, I think Scott Rowland is a borderline Hall of Famer. But I don't think Scott Rowland. I think that the only reason why Scott Rowland would be going into the Hall of Fame is because of a weak ballot. That's it. I don't think Scott Rowland's going in because of any other reason other than it being a weak ballot. Yes, he's in his sixth year, but the fact that he would go in ahead of Billy Wagner, ahead of Gary Sheffield, ahead of Jeff Kent, ahead of people who meet the Hall of Fame credentials more than he does, is a little bit like, I'm sorry, what? I'm not saying that Scott Rowland doesn't deserve to be enshrined in the Hall of Fame. I think with how the ballot is, I do believe Scott Rowland could be a Hall of Famer because people do make a good case for Scott Rowland to get inducted into the Hall of Fame. But the fact that Jeff Kent may fall off the ballot and will likely fall off the ballot to be enshrined by the the contemporary era committee that got Fred McGriff and undid the big mistake that they did with Fred McGriff, not allowing Fred McGriff to enter the hallowed halls of Cooperstown. The fact of the matter is, Jeff Kent should be in, Don Mattingly should be in, Keith Hernandez should be in. I would have no problem with Mark Burley staying on the ballot. I would have no problem with Beltran. I would have no problem with K-Rod. K-Rod deserves to stay on the ballot. Houston Street is borderline because I would say I'm more of the old-fashioned mentality of you meet a certain amount of saves, you dominate as a closer for a certain amount of time, then, in my opinion, you deserve to stay on. I'm not saying Houston Street is a Hall of Famer. I'm saying that he deserves some consideration. But but I also think that if you played for a certain amount of time, that you should be considered, and that there should be a minimum and a maximum. And in my opinion, I know for a fact that I'm one of those people that prefer the bigger Hall of Fame, that I would rather see somebody go in as opposed to nobody go in. But I would love to see Billy Wagner enter the Hall of Fame. And it seems like with his trajectory, based on the Hall of Fame tracking, it seems like with his trajectory, he will be in the Hall of Fame next year, not 2023, 2024. So I'm okay with that because in 2024, Joe Mauer, Adrian Beltre, David Wright, Joey Bats, James Shields, Denard Span, Brendan Phillips, Chase Headley, Giovanni Gallardo, Stephen Drew, Doug Fister. Oh, sorry, Stephen Drew's on first ballot this year. Jim Johnson, Chris Tillman. The list goes on and on and on. Point is, outside of Adrian Beltre and maybe David Wright, it is a weak ballot. I don't think David Wright is a Hall of Famer, in my opinion. I think he's a team specific Hall of Famer. I think Chase Utley is a team specific Hall of Famer. Same with Jose Reyes, and Jose Batista. I think Jose Batista could see a Hall of Fame induction to the Toronto Blue Jays. Reyes and Wright deserve the Mets. Chase Utley with the Phillies. Bartolo Colon with the Indians. Hell, I think Bartolo Colon should get some consideration based on how long he pitched and his statistics. That I think Bartolo Colon deserves at least some consideration. I'm not saying Bart is a Hall of Famer. I'm saying I think he deserves consideration in 2024 when he's on the ballot. But I think with the weak ballot, Billy Wagner will get in next year. He deserves it irrefutably. Irrefutably does Billy Wagner deserve an induction into the Hall of Fame. I would love to see people like Alex Rodriguez and Manny Ramirez fall off the ballot because of their issues with steroids, and I'll just leave it at that. And I think that will give people like Torrey Hunter, Mark Burley, Bobby Abreu, Jimmy Rollins, Matt Holliday, people that, Joey Bats, people like that. I think it will give people like that the opportunity to stay on the ballot because there may be some people that are hesitant and unwilling to vote for other people. Like, I think there may be some people that this year may not want to vote for Jeff Kent because it's his last year and they don't think that Jeff Kent will bump that much. Right now, Jeff Kent has bumped from the mid 30s or the low 30s to the low 40s. And yes, there is a little bit of trajectory, volatility, meaning it could either go up or down based on the final ballots because this isn't 100% foolproof because Scott Rowland is at an 80 right now, and that doesn't necessarily mean that Scott Rowland will go in at an 80. He could go in at a 78, 79, 77, 81, somewhere in that area, but he is around an 80. Same with Todd Helton. Right now, both guys are well above the 75% threshold. Since the last time I looked at it, Andrew Jones has went up. Carlos Beltran has stayed pat. Gary Sheffield is, I would say, probably stuck around the same. The one thing that I would say is that in 2024, I do believe that they go back to the pre-war Veterans Committee for the Hall of Fame. I do believe that they go back to the pre-war or the classic baseball era composite ballot. I could be wrong, but I think that's where they're going next year. Classic Baseball Era balloting in December 2024 for Class of 2025. Contemporary Baseball Era non-players, managers, executives, and umpires balloting in 2023 for Class of 2024. So that means people, managers, executives, and umpires that may have missed the Hall of Fame are are up for balloting in 2023. So somehow, some way, Lou Piniella is not a Hall of Famer. George Steinbrenner is not a Hall of Famer. Davey Johnson, Charlie Manuel, Roger Craig, Ron Gardenhire, Cito Gaston, Dick Hauser, Jim Leland. I'm surprised that Jim Leland, Jack McKeon, Mike Scioscia, Bobby V, Don Zimmer, Dan O'Dowd, John Hart. I'm surprised by some of these guys. I'm very surprised by some of these guys. Jerry Crawford, Bob Davidson, Jim Evans, Rich Garcia, Tim McClelland, Ed Montague, Steve Palmero, Dave Phillips, Mike Riley, Tim Wilkie, Harry Wendelstead. The one thing I would note is that Dusty Baker and Bruce Bochy are not eligible to be inducted because they are still actively managing, and Dave Dombrowski and Stan Katzen are ineligible until after the 2023 Today's Game ballot, as they will not have been retired for 5 years nor turned 70 until after their election. Which Dave Dombrowski is still the manager of the Phillies. I know Stan Katzen used to be an executive for the Braves, and I think he was an executive for the Dodgers now, that he was a part of the ownership group of the Dodgers. But as far as the balloting for 2024, the Classic Baseball Era, which is 1871 to 1979, former eligible Major League Baseball player ballot, it includes a lot of random people. With Bobby Bonds, Vida Blue, Dave Concepcion, Sparky Lyle, Dusty Baker, Greg Nettles, Bobby Mercer, Rick Monday, Mickey Lolich, Luis Tiant, Rusty Staub, Al Oliver, Thurman Munson, Billy Martin, Gene Monk, Ralph Howitt, John McNamara, Harry Dalton. I know I'm saying a lot of names that people may not remember or may not know. Roger Maris, Kurt Flood, Rocky Colavito, Vada Pinson, Murray Wills. You know, as far as some of these, I'm surprised that a lot of, some of these guys are not in the Hall of Fame already. But I think that's the case for a lot of Hall of Famers or a lot of fans, that there's a lot of surprise that certain people are not in the Hall of Fame. But as far as this year and the Veterans Committee, it is the non-players, the contemporary baseball era for non-players, which is fixated on the managers, executives, and umpires. And it is the secondary voting of the people that were eligible this year, because it was the contemporary baseball era players that were available this year for the Hall of Fame ballot. Future for 2022, 2025 or 2026 is Dwight Evans, Dave Parker, Lou Whitaker, Don Mattingly, Dale Murphy, Albert Bell, Will Clark, of course, Bonds and Clemens, McGuire, Ron Guidry, Keith Hernandez, Roberto Hernandez, Charlie Huff, Steve Finley, Dante Bichette, John Olerud, Rafael Palmeiro, Paul O'Neill, Kurt Schilling, Darryl Strawberry, Bridget Surhoff. The list goes on and on and on. The list goes on and on and on and on and on. And there will be some other people eligible for induction. Jim Edmonds, Luis Gonzalez, Tim Hudson, Paul Konerko, Justin Morneau, Maglio Ordonez, Roy Oswald, Jonathan Papelbon, Georgie Posada, Johan Santana, Miguel Tejada. These guys will be available after the 2023 All-Star Game. But as far as this year's ballot is concerned, I'm sticking with my early guesses for the induction are Todd Helton and Scott Rowland. Unfortunately, Billy Wagner will miss this year's Hall of Fame. And as far as 2024 is concerned, I do believe that Billy Wagner will get in. And the way that Andrew Jones is tracking this year, it does seem like Andrew Jones may join Billy Wagner in the class of 2024. But as far as the class of 2025, I think there is only one surefire Hall of Famer for the class of 2025, and that is Ichiro Suzuki, who is a first ballot in 2025. CC Sabathia will likely stay on the ballot. I could see Felix Hernandez staying on the ballot, to be honest with you. Maybe not. But there is weak ballots, but there are years where you're going to see people who absolutely deserve the opportunity to be considered for the Hall of Fame stay on the ballot and get in. And I do believe that as far as the end of January, you will see Todd Helton, Fred McGriff, and Scott Rowland getting ready to be enshrined in the hallowed halls of Cooperstown in July of 2023. As far as July of 2024, Billy Wagner and likely Andrew Jones will be inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame. My only question is, will Gary Sheffield make it next year? I don't know. It is a good sign for Carlos Beltran tracking at 50% on his first ballot. I do not believe that Beltran is a first ballot Hall of Famer. I do think it is incredibly unfortunate that the rate that Jeff Kent is going, he will not make it into the hallowed halls of Cooperstown. Mark Burley does deserve consideration to stay on the ballot, as does Francisco Rodriguez and Bobby Abreu, as well as Jimmy Rollins. But as far as everybody else, I think there are some that are borderline. There are some that I think would be surprised if they got a vote. But I would love to see every year somebody get inducted into the Hall of Fame, but that's not how it works. Every year, I think, in my opinion, my ballot would be Todd Helton, Billy Wagner, Andrew Jones, Scott Rowland, Gary Sheffield, Jeff Kent, Jimmy Rollins, Torrey Hunter, Carlos Beltran, and Francisco Rodriguez, with Houston Street bordering on the end. Now, I do believe 10 is the minimum. I think 8 might be the minimum now. If that is the case, then I would probably scratch out Jimmy Rollins for Carlos Beltran. I think I would probably scratch out Jimmy Rollins for Carlos Beltran because K-Rod is in his first year. And maybe I would scratch out Scott Rowland for Francisco Rodriguez. Just to give Francisco that opportunity to possibly stay on the ballot. Just to give Francisco Rodriguez that opportunity to stay on the ballot. But in my opinion, I think all those guys fit the model of people that were at one point the most dominant or the most athletic or the most the person that if you wanted to draft an all-star team, you would say Todd Helton at first base, Billy Wagner at closer, Andrew Jones at center, Scott Rowland at third base, Gary Sheffield in right field, Jeff Kent at second, Jimmy Rollins at short, and Torrey Hunter in left field. Carlos Beltran at DH, and K-Rod in the bullpen. Imagine a bullpen with K-Rod and Billy Wagner and Houston Street as a three-headed monster. At one point, I would say John Lackey was a staff ace. At one point, I would say Matt Cain was a go-to staff ace. But I don't think either one of them were Hall of Fame material, in my opinion. It's been a while since we've seen a top-flight starter, on the Hall of Fame ballot. But Felix Hernandez will be on the Hall of Fame ballot in 2025. And in my opinion, that's what meets it. That you have to say this guy was the most dominant person at their position, or a dominant person, or an all-star at their position. Like somebody that if you, as a casual fan, thought of that position, you would be like, I want this guy. Because you know them and you know that they would be the best at their position, or you think that they are the best at their position. And I think at one point or another, Scott Rowland and Todd Helton, Billy Wagner and Andrew Jones were considered the best at their position. I don't think all four of them will get in this year, but I think all four of them are future Hall of Famers. So with that being said, I will see you in the next video. I hope you enjoyed this conversation about Cooperstown.